In this lesson, we're going to talk about the Layers panel. If you understand how the layers work in Photoshop, this will go a long way towards giving you control and command over your documents. The Layers panel is divided into several different sections, and we'll start from the top and work our way down, and we'll use this document to showcase the different features of the panel. This first bar at the top is something that's new in Photoshop CS6, and you can toggle this on and off by clicking on this button here. When it's turned on, you can actually sort the layers inside the Layers panel by any of these options, by kind, by name, by effect, mode, attribute, or color. You can also use these little buttons here to filter for different things. So this is filtering for pixel layers, filtering for adjustment layers, filtering for text layers, filtering for paths, and this last one is for smart objects. And these are toggle buttons, so you can toggle those on and off at any time. If you selected the name option, you can actually type in the name. Now, sometimes when you're working in Photoshop, you might have 100 or more layers, and it might be hard to find it. You might not remember where it is, so you could type in the name, and it would bring you right to it. I'm just going to leave it on kind here, and then I'm going to turn it off so that it doesn't distract us while we're working. This next area is grayed out, and that's because we don't have a layer selected. So you'll need to select a layer before you can choose any of these other options. Now, before we go into that, I just want to take a look for a second at what's here in the Layers panel and tell you the difference between a regular layer and a locked background layer. In fact, I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key and click on the background layer's visibility icon to hide all of the other layers. A locked background layer is typically like the canvas of a painting that you're about to start. It's locked, which means that you cannot erase the color of the canvas, and you can add to it, but you usually can't sort of remove any of the transparent pixels on it. These other layers on top of them do support transparency. And I want you to think about working in Photoshop like layering sheets of acetate on top of your canvas, and each sheet has some pixels on it or pictures on it. And then you're layering them one on top of the other. So starting from the very bottom, that's your canvas, your locked background layer. And then all of these other layers are layered on top. And if you look at this little thumbnail view of your image, you'll see the image, which is just a slice on the thumbnail. And then the rest of the thumbnail has this checkerboard. That represents transparency. So as we're turning all these individual layers on, we're seeing where they're falling, one on top of the other, inside the workspace. Now I'm going to do that again. I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key and click on the visibility icon for my locked background layer. And we're going to select that layer. You do need to select the layer that you want to modify before you modify it. And I want to talk about painting and modifying layers so that you can really see the difference with this. Selecting my paintbrush tool, I'm just going to click and drag through the document. And actually, let's hide the guides for a second here. As I was painting, I'm actually painting with black on top of the background. Now, if I were to try to erase this, I could erase with my eraser tool to make it go away. But what I'm really doing on a locked background layer is I'm painting with white. I'm sort of replacing what was there before with the color. So for instance, if my background color was a different color and I wanted to replace it, or actually let's do this. If I wanted to erase with a different background color, this will probably make more sense. I'm not actually erasing, I'm painting with the background color shown here. There is a panel called the History panel, and this will keep track of all of the changes that you're making while you're working. So I can actually go back in time and undo all the steps that I'm making. Now, that's working on a locked background layer. You can add to it, but when you erase, you're actually painting with whatever the background color is showing here in the workspace. I'm going to reset that by clicking on this little button here. And now I'm going to create a brand new layer by clicking this button at the bottom of the Layers panel. And the new layers always go above whatever layer was selected. And now if I grab my paintbrush tool and I paint, I'm painting with this brush on transparency. So now if I hide my background layer, you will see the brush stroke. It's just the brush stroke and the rest of the layer is transparent. If I go to erase it, I'm not painting with white. I'm erasing to transparency. So really there's just the two things that you need to remember about the different kinds of layers. There's transparent layers that when you add to them, you're adding color on top of a transparency. When you erase from them, you're erasing to transparency. And then there's your locked background layer, which can be any color that you want. You can add to it, but when you erase from it or try to erase from it, you'd actually be replacing whatever color was there before. I'm going to delete this layer by dragging it into the trash and releasing my mouse. You could also delete it by selecting the layer and clicking the trash icon. A dialog box will ask you if you really want to delete it. You can click yes and then move on. So now I'm going to turn on all of my layers, making them visible. And we'll go through again, like I said, from the top down to see what's going on with these different layers. Let's start by selecting the fire layer. So that would be the layer that we wanted to modify and make changes to. Right now, the default blending mode is set to normal. A blending mode will determine how one layer interacts with other layers below it. The blending modes can be any of these things, and there's sometimes very dull and boring descriptions for what these each do. And I always tell my students when I teach in the classroom to look at them individually and see what they're doing to your document so that you can see what's going on. Sometimes seeing what it looks like rather than hearing a description of what it will make more sense to you. So for instance, you can choose dissolve, and on a PC you can use your up-down arrows to toggle between the different blending modes. There's darken, there's multiply, color burn, linear burn, and we're not really seeing too many things happening here because the background, as I showed you before, is white. And if the background was a different color, then we would see different things happening. So let me show you a different layer. Let's say this butterfly shape layer. This has a different blending mode applied to it. It has the overlay. But if we chose normal, we would see that it's a solid color. It's a pink color. And in fact, the opacity has been set down to 60%. So if we bring it up to 100% and then modify the blending mode, we'll see something different happening. So there's dissolve. Dissolve usually deals with around the outer edges of a shape. Darken makes it darken but transparent. Multiply is a little bit darker than darken. Color burn, linear burn, darker color, lighten, screen, dodge. And I'm just going to scroll through these without calling out their names now. So you can see different things are happening with each of these different blending modes. And sometimes you can get some really amazing and unexpected results with the different blending modes. So if you're looking for some way to sort of pizzazz up your document, check out the blending modes. You might find something that really does a lot to your document to really make it stand out. So I'm going to put the opacity back to 60% the way it was before. As you saw, you can use the slider here to increase or decrease the opacity. You can plug in the number numerically just by clicking, or some of these dialog boxes have what are called scrubby sliders. If you put your cursor on top of the word, you see the left-right arrow on top of the tip of the finger, and you can actually click and drag to increase or decrease whatever that is. I'm just going to type that in there and leave it back at 60. So you can change the blending modes of any selected layer. Now below this are a set of locks. The locks deal with locking down pixels so that you can modify certain aspects of the selected layer. So now let's choose the key, for instance. Now the key is just a graphic with some transparency, and on top of the key is a clipping layer that is clipping the color of the key with this green color to make it green. And if we wanted to lock down the pixels of this key shape, we could click on this first lock. This will lock down any transparent pixels, so that if we wanted to change the color of the key, and of course if we change the color of the key completely, we'd probably lose all the detail because it's a photographic image, but let's say we wanted to change the color of it, we can choose a color, and you can select any colors by clicking once on either the foreground or the background color icon in your toolbar. This color picker dialog box comes open, and then you can select any color. There's a slider here that you can go up and down the rainbow, and then once you choose the hue that you want, you can click anywhere inside of this to choose a different color. When you're ready, click OK. That color now becomes your new foreground color. And let's say I just wanted to fill this shape with that blue. I could do Edit, Fill. It will ask me if I want to use the foreground color. I could choose background or specify a color, use a pattern, use black, white, or gray. Click OK. And now it's filling that shape with the solid color. I've lost the photographic image, but I now have that color that's clipped by this other green. I'm going to go to my history panel and undo. If I had not locked down that layer and went to fill it with that same color blue, the entire contents of that layer would fill with that color. So what's great about this, and I'm just going to undo this again, what's great about this first lock is that it will lock your transparent pixels. And it's really great when you're filling a layer or selection with a solid color. It helps retain the quality of the semi-transparent edge pixels around a shape. The second lock here is dealing with paintbrush. So if you lock down the image pixels, you would not be able to paint or erase or modify in any way the pixels on that particular layer. Now, some people like to lock down their layers while they're working so they don't accidentally modify a layer that they didn't intend to. Other designers tend to lock down layers after those layers are finished, or some people only lock them as they need them, and that's a toggle button as well. This next one deals with the position of a selected layer. So if you lock down the position, that means you would no longer be able to move the object on that layer. And again, some people like to use that to lock down their layers to make sure they don't accidentally move something unintentionally. This last lock is sort of like the granddaddy of all locks. It will lock down everything on that selected layer so that you can't do anything to it. It's finished, you can't touch it, and that again is a toggle button on and off. Now, another thing I wanted to mention to you is that, and let's change the background color here to a different color, that blue, so that we can play with the blending modes now on top of the blue. Let's say I wanted to modify the fire's blending mode to something like overlay. So now we have a blue looking set of flames rather than the orange and yellow set of flames. But let's say I wanted to do multiple blending modes across several layers at once. This is a nice new feature of CS6, is that you can actually select multiple layers and apply the overlay or any of these to all of the layers at once, whereas before you would have to go in and select each layer and apply the blending mode one at a time. So now you can do all of them the same at once by just selecting. When you're selecting a layer, you just click on it, and if you wanted to select more than one, you would shift click. But if you need to select one that's not touching the others, you would Command or Control click to add or subtract from your selection, and then you can make modifications to all of the selected layers. Your layers can be reorganized at any time just by clicking and dragging. So I have a little flag icon here, and it is below where the butterfly is. So let's say I needed it to be above the butterfly. All I need to do to reorder this is click and drag. And when you see the double lines appearing between any two layers in the panel, that means you can safely drop it between those layers, like so. So you can reorder them at any time. You can also create folders for similar elements. And this is a really good housekeeping sort of skill to get in the habit of early when you're learning Photoshop. So for instance, I have fire, water, earth, and air, and I might like to put those into a single folder. So I'm going to click and shift click to select them all. And then to put them into a folder, I click on this options menu. Most of your panels will have an options menu that has information specific to that panel. For instance, in the layers panel options menu, you can create new layers, duplicate layers, delete hidden layers, create new groups, or what we want, create a new group from layers. You can also lock your layers here. And we'll talk about some of these other things as we go in different lessons. So new group from layers. It's asking me what I want to name this new group. I can call it my elements, if I can spell. And now we have all of those elements in a single layer, and that grouping can be expanded or collapsed at any time, like so. And within that grouping, or folder, whatever you want to call it, you can reposition the layers within it, although I liked it the way I had it before, where they mirror the order that they appear in the document. Sometimes you might want to link one or more layers together so that you can move them or modify them all at once. To do that, what you'll do is you'll select the layer or layers that you want to link, and then click on this little link icon at the bottom. That way, if I ever wanted to move the text, that little flag icon is moving at the same time, and vice versa. If I want to move the flag icon, the elements would move at the same time. I'm just going to undo that move so that everything goes back to the way it was. To unlink any linked layers, you just select one or more of the layers and then click the unlink button, and it's a toggle feature. You could also merge layers together if you wanted to. So for instance, if I want to make sure that this key always has this color fill applied to it, I could select those two layers, and then as I open up the options menu, I can choose merge layers. This will combine those two layers onto a single layer, like so. And now I have the key as one single layer, the photographic image with the color correction on top of it as one single layer. Now I'm going to undo with the keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control Z, to show you that sometimes what you could do is create a merged layer based on two or more selected layers, leaving the original selected layers intact, but ending up with a new layer merged from those. And the way you'll do that is you'll select your layers, you'll hold down your Alt or Option key, then go into the Options menu and choose Merge Layers. This gives you a merged copy of the layers, leaving your original layers intact. And that's a really great, handy, sort of fun little tidbit that I think you'll probably use often. It gives you the flexibility of trying new things while retaining the integrity of your original files in case you ever needed to change them. Like, you may love this, and you go and show it to your art director or your client, and they go, "Ooh, key's great, lose the green." If you had merged it, then you'd have to go get the key all over again. But if you have a merged file and you need to change the green, all you need to do is come in here, go in and choose another color. Let's do something lighter. And then it's ready to go. So that brings me to talking about some of these special layers. This is what's called a color fill adjustment layer, and it's modifying or clipping this layer below. So we can choose the color and we can modify the color at any time, and we'll talk a little bit more about these in another lesson. These are non-destructive, editable layers that will modify any object or any pixels on a particular layer. There's also shape layers, and shape layers you can create with the shape tool, which I'll show you in another lesson. And this shape layer happens to have a special effect applied to it, and you can tell it has a special effect because of this FX button. If you expand this layer by clicking on that arrow, you will see that there are some effects, well, in this case, one effect, and that's the drop shadow effect. You can add and remove effects to any layer by clicking on this FX button at the bottom of the Layers panel. There's drop shadow, outer glow, pattern, overlay, gradient overlay, color overlay, satin, inner glow and outer shadow, stroke, and bevel and emboss. And you can apply any of these at any time to any layer. So let's say we wanted to apply a bevel and emboss to this. This layer style dialog box comes open, and there's a category listing along the left, and then the middle part of the dialog box will update depending on which category is selected. Now sometimes when the layer style box opens, it's set to blending options, and you'll see these options here. Don't want you to get confused. Whenever you need to make a change or add a layer style, you really need to select it in the category or styles listing on the left first in order to see the options that you want to modify on the right. So there's our butterfly, and we put a little slight bevel on it, but we don't have to stick with what it gave us. We can make some changes. So there's inner and outer bevel, there's emboss, pillow emboss, and stroke emboss. So we could try any of those. And then based on the style, we can also choose the technique. There's smooth, chisel hard, chisel soft. And let's leave it on smooth. And then you can say the depth of the chisel. Let's go back to outer bevel. So you can say what the depth is. So you can increase and decrease that. You can also switch the direction from up to down. And then you can control the size of it. So in this case, to try and keep it semi-realistic, you probably wouldn't want to go too far. And then you can soften it down a little bit. Just sort of fuzzes out the edges. As far as shading goes, you can adjust the angle of the shading by clicking anywhere in here. Or if you happen to know the degree that you wanted to use, you can plug that in here, as well as the altitude. Global light deals with a single unified light source that would be used for all the objects on all the layers in a particular document. And if you ever wanted to veer away from that and add another light source, you would just deselect that option. Now, every single layer style has a different set of options here. So typically what I instruct people to do is to go into the different categories and then play around with the sliders to see what can happen. So for instance, in the drop shadow category, you can choose the blending mode, although multiply with black is a really good option for working with realistic looking drop shadows. But you can increase or decrease the opacity and change the angle. You can set the distance. You can choose the spread, like how sharp the edges are, and the size of it as well. And one thing I love about the drop shadow is that you can actually click and drag and move the drop shadow anywhere. So we can make it look like this butterfly is hovering above the grass or flying in the clouds or whatever. We can do it something like this. Move it anywhere you like, or just keep it right below the butterfly. This dragging feature only works when the layer style dialog box is open. When you're done adding or editing your layer styles, you'll click OK. And then if it's a new style that's added to an existing style, you'll see it listed here. Notice that there's visibility icons next to them, so you can toggle off all the effects at once or toggle off individual effects. And those can stay as effects for that layer and be toggled on and off. Or if you say, I really don't want the bevel and emboss, you can select it and hide it, and it doesn't have to show up on your document. So this toggles open and close special effects. The other buttons here at the bottom, let me select the key again. You can create a mask by clicking on this button here, adding a layer mask, and that will add a mask on top of your entire workspace unless you were to make a selection beforehand. One thing I really love about the Layers panel is this next feature. You can create a selection from any existing object on any layer by putting your cursor on the thumbnail and holding down your Command or Control key. And that changes the little hand cursor to a hand with a little square and a dotted line on top of it. Then, if you click on the thumbnail, you can reselect whatever object or objects are on that layer. So now if I click the mask button, I'm saying make a mask with the selection. And what happens now is it's masking away everything but the key. So that if I did anything to that layer, it would only get applied to the area of the key and not anywhere else. And we're going to talk a lot more about masks in another lesson. This next button here is to create a new fill or adjustment layer. This is called non-destructive editing, which means that you're adding sort of almost like tinted glasses on top of your layers that will modify how you see those layers, but they're not permanently modifying the pixels of your original image or layer. You could do destructive editing. There are ways for you to do that through the Image Adjustments menu. So any of these options here would be considered destructive. But I would highly recommend you avoid that and always work with these adjustment layers and fill layers here because it's non-destructive and it gives you the flexibility of changing your mind at any time without ruining the original file. And we will talk about most of these in another lesson, but just to show you what I'm talking about, we can create a solid color gradient or pattern fill. We could choose a solid color and fill the entire layer, or, undoing with a keyboard shortcut, we can create a selection and then fill that selection with a solid color. And if we ever wanted to change our mind about the color, and I showed you this similar feature before, all you have to do is double click on that color and you can go ahead and change it at any time. The last couple of buttons at the bottom of the Layers panel we've already seen. You can create groups for your layers here. You don't have to go to the Options menu. This is where you will create a new layer. Click here to create a new layer above whatever layer that you're on. And then if you ever need to delete a layer, you can click the little delete button or drag and drop the layer or selected layers into your mini trash icon. Now that you have an understanding of how the Layers panels work, you can take all that information into the future lessons and have more control over your documents.